On this week's podcast, after Easter, Timmy and I talk about some quick hits from the news and our thoughts on those news stories.
Bald, blind, and buddies.
Timmy C., how are you, pal?
I'm good.
Happy Monday. I'm sorry we for the hundreds and hundreds, right? We're not allowed to say dozens and dozens anymore, right? And by the way, we're not making fun of the people that listen to us with regularity. We're nothing but appreciative, but we're making fun of ourselves that two morons that have known each other for 30 plus years just argue back and forth and somehow or another people find it entertaining. Right,
well,
Timmy?
Speaking of which, John, we were contacted by a legitimate journalist who wanted to tap into your skills of reaching out to people to talk to one of our former guests.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, that's right. You did send me that. And we reached out. We did.
We did.
Now, let me ask you a question. How did it feel to say the words legitimate journalist, Timmy? Since I know you...
I'm not going to dwell on it
Isn't
too
that
long.
a contradiction in terms as you see it?
I was being complimentary.
Okay. I mean, what is an illegitimate journalist? I would argue anyone who works for Fox News, but you go ahead.
Or M. Snow, or whatever it's called now. MS Now.
Oh, right. M. Snow. Yeah, MS Now. Yeah, that's true. But anyway, we had to push this a day because of the Easter holiday. And, I am what they refer to as ashes and palms. I go on Christmas and I go on Easter. I'm not terribly religious, as you know, Timmy. We'll leave it at that. But I do enjoy Easter Mass, and we just didn't have a chance to make the podcast fit like we normally do on a Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. And we said, you know what? It's our podcast. The heck with it. We'll push it to Monday, and folks will be fine with it. Right, Tim?
Absolutely.
Yeah. How was your Easter, by the way?
It was good. Went over to the in-laws and then a nice, easy time at home afterwards. We played some Settlers of Catan, which I'm sure has colonial overtones, but it's a fun board game.
That is an old board game, too, is it not?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. And how are the in-laws? Did you keep your mouth shut about politics? Because it applies not only at Thanksgiving, it applies at most major holidays, Tim.
It was just my parents-in-law, so it wasn't my sister-in-law, so it was fine.
Oh, so they're much more easy to deal with?
Yeah.
Or much easier, I should say, to deal with? Okay, cool. And did you guys have ham?
We had ham, lamb, and chicken.
How do you feel about lamb, by the way?
That's fine. I mean,
I'm not a fan. Not a fan at all. But Timmy, before we jump into our quick hits from the news, which is going to be today's podcast, right?
Yep.
We are going to, let me just real quick get into the trivia question and this week's trivia, because I do want to ask you some serious questions about these quick hits from the news. There's a couple that deal with psychiatry and the Supreme Court and such, and I'm going to ask your feelings on it, okay?
Sure.
Okay. So the Masters starts this Thursday, is the first round. I always love this time of the year. It's symbolic of sort of rebirth to me, pitchers and catchers report, and then first day of spring training, March Madness, and now the Masters. It's like, oh, we're heading into the good part of the year, at least weather-wise. And the question that I asked is, who holds the record for the most Masters wins with 6? Do you know who that is, Tim?
Jack Nicklaus.
That would be correct. Yeah, Jack Nicklaus won, and he won his last one at the age of 46 in 1986. So just a little bit younger than you and I are now. So still holds us hope, right?
Yeah.
If you want to go out and challenge the Masters.
Yep.
But tonight is the national championship game in basketball, men's basketball, and it's between UConn and Michigan. I am rooting for UConn for this simple reason. I find it unjust that schools are very good at two sports. Meaning Notre Dame is known as a football school. Villanova is a basketball school. Kentucky's a basketball school, right? You can't win a national title in football, as Michigan did just in the last 5 years, and then win a national title in basketball. To me, it's a question of justice and morality. So hence I will be rooting for UConn.
To me, it's a question of the size of your pockets and NIL.
Of course. But two things can be true at the same time, can't they, Tim?
I suppose.
Yeah. So, but if UConn is able to win, they will win 3 of 4. So they have won the back-to-back, not this past year. This past year was Florida, but they won the 2 previous years prior, and now they're right back in the finals this year, and if they were able to win, they would win 3 out of 4. Do you know who is the last men's basketball team in the NCAA who can lay credit to that, having won 3 championships in 4 years? Tim?
I have some guesses.
Yeah, we'll do it next week.
All right.
Cool?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, As you know, Timmy, I keep my. I'm trying as best I can to stay away from the news. Right. But it's omnipresent. You hear things as you're walking by. You see things. They pop up. Even with your phones now, they give you news alerts and such. And I know you can turn off the notifications, but literally I get notifications for sports and for sales at Target, and our grocery store is having sale on ham. So it's almost like junk mail. Do you remember when you go get the mail and there was 78 pieces and you just stop paying attention to all of them? Well, that's how I am kind of with the news. But a couple did make it through this week, and I want to talk about them in turn, if that's cool by you.
Yeah.
Okay. The first one is my brother's home state. My brother lives in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Idaho has just passed, both houses of their legislature have passed a ban on using bathrooms that are not assigned to your sex at birth. So basically they're targeting transgender folks who, use the bathroom that they recognize with, or the gender with which they associate. If you don't have the male genitalia and you go into a male bathroom, there's going to be a problem, and vice versa. You understand what I'm saying, right? It's basically they're outlawing the practice of transgender folks using the bathroom with the sex they identify with. They basically are saying if you're not born with it, you can't go in there. How do you feel about that, Tim?
Well, it's an interesting question. I guess the first thing that comes to mind is, how often is this really going to come up? Like, it's a law, and you're like, well, when is this? I think all this does is it gives some leverage to biological women who have people in their spaces who probably have equipment which makes them uncomfortable. And if that means they're breaking the law in there and it helps these biological women, I'm all for it.
Okay. That's a pretty very sort of nuanced and sort of intelligent way of putting it. I also am reminded that I don't like the notion that if you don't like something, you should just leave, right? You don't like Trump, so get out of the country. No, I've always felt that the best way is to stay and fight for how you want the country to be, not leave the country.
Yeah.
But to me, how many people can this affect in a state like Idaho?
Right.
I'm sure, I'm making a joke, but I'm sure there are a number of folks that are transgender or identify with different sex in that state. But again, should you be transgender and moving to Idaho in the first place would be the first question I ask. But the real reason I bring this up, Tim, is because there seems to be a movement afoot within the Supreme Court that they're carving out sort of these exemptions for religious sort of basis of laws.
Well, let's back up on this though. So this doesn't necessarily have any religiousness to it, right? And I don't know if you've ever come across Riley Gaines. She was the swimmer on the same team as Leah Thomas.
Yeah, I have.
And she describes in detail how uncomfortable it was in the changing room because apparently Leah was not shy about changing with these biological women. And I think that's what this is designed for. I don't know if we need to go down a religious angle with this. Keeping your daughter from seeing stuff, isn't religious.
Hey, you know what? Well said. And I'll leave it at that because I want to get on to different topics. We're going to talk about the Supreme Court here in a minute as well. But I'm getting frustrated by the idea that, public space, and this goes back to my question about the baker in Colorado. Now, that law was written very much targeted towards, and it was unfairly written. It really was. And the Supreme Court basically remanded it back to the state and said, fix this and so forth. I get that. But it seems to me that if you are someone who has entered the public domain and you're selling services to the public, you can't pick and choose, what you religiously object to. Think of birth control back in the 1960s. They basically said, yes, if you have a religious, problem with this, you have to have someone on staff that is willing to dispense birth control, even if you have a religious qualm with it. It seems to me that there seems to be a movement afoot within the Supreme Court. We don't have to get into it in too much detail, but it concerns me. And I'm just not sure that this is something that needs to be necessarily addressed by law. But I get it, right? So, yeah. What do you want to talk about, Tim? Anything?
Well, I definitely want to talk about the Chili's decision of the Supreme Court. Should we talk about that?
Yes, please.
So we talked about this on the podcast at least once. Colorado passed a law. The headline is banning conversion therapy, but if you read down into the law, it basically bans any therapy that tries to get somebody to change their behavior or gender expression, and essentially only allows therapists to provide therapy that is pro-trans. And so the Supreme Court, in an 8-1 decision, it basically said, as I understand it, you're engaging in viewpoint censorship, and that professionals like counselors don't give up their First Amendment rights because they are such, and that you can't just declare talking a medical intervention so that you can censor it. And that's sort of how the court ruled.
Yeah, and that when you say the Chili's case, you're talking about the name of the therapist.
The therapist,
and her
yeah.
name
Chili's
actually,
versus Salazar, I think it was.
Yeah. It's pronounced
Childs,
by the way.
Sorry.
Yeah. CH.
I'm hungry.
Yes.
I want to go to Chili's.
There you go. Kaylee Childs, a counselor who offers talk therapy, sued to challenge the Colorado ban, it says. And, as you know, and I'm going to actually agree with the judges on this. It was an 8-1 decision. So the only judge that dissented was Justice Jackson, Ketanji Brown Jackson. And she said this is opening a slippery slope, which I'm going to ask you about from a psychiatric standpoint, Timmy, if that's cool. Mm-hmm. But I was actually amazed because basically the Wall Street Journal, and what I try to do if and when I decide to read the news, particularly, in-depth analysis of things and such, is I try to read I run the gamut, if you will. You can go to, if you're liberal, you turn on MSNBC. If you're conservative, you turn on Fox. It's the same way with print news. And obviously, the Wall Street Journal tends to hew conservative, obviously, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the other direction. So I try to read as much as I can and see where the truth lies. And this was something that jumped out at me with the Wall Street Journal. They said the Supreme Court said that the interpretation of the Colorado law is wrong. The High Court's conclusion hinged in part on an asymmetry in the law. The law prohibits treatment that attempts or purports to change a minor's sexual orientation or gender identity, but it does not apply to treatments assisting minors undergoing gender transition away from their biological sex. In other words, the Wall Street Journal says, the law allows counselors to help minors embrace a transgender identity, but it does not allow them to help minors reject the experience of being transgender. And that, to me, and again, I tend to be, as I've said multiple times on this podcast, I tend to be very much pro First Amendment. And, on the edge cases where it's 65 or 55, 45, I'm going to lean towards making the First Amendment protected, right? Mm-hmm. And I think I've been pretty consistent on that, Tim. And so that part really struck me with the Wall Street Journal. So I'm okay with the 8-1 ruling. My question to you, though, is Timmy, is as a psychiatrist, because speech can be medicine. I mean, that's what essentially you do. Now, granted, you can prescribe medicines that deal with brain chemistry and so forth. But how do you feel about that? Is that a slippery slope? Because what you say is medicine, is it not?
Yeah, I think there's a therapeutic power in certain kinds of, interactions. However, I don't think that creates a space where the First Amendment doesn't apply, because it's still speech. It's still this arena of ideas. If you look at Ketanji Brown's concern, she wanted a legislature to mandate science, right? And we've been through the pandemic. We know science isn't necessarily established or reported honestly, frankly. And I was trying to rack my brain if there are state laws that prevent drilling holes in skulls to let the evil spirits out, or, a good bleeding. But I think what happens is you let science take care of itself, and you let people talk and share ideas, and things will rise to the top. And if you're banning a whole viewpoint from discussion, that can never happen. And so I think that's why the ruling of the court makes sense.
Okay, but what if somebody's viewpoint is factually incorrect? And again, this is talking the extreme in an area where there tends to be very gray. I recognize that. Right. But if somebody is arguing the point that the earth is flat, there is facts that can prove them incorrect. And again, the vast majority, including the American Psychiatric Association, I'm not going to ask you how you feel about conversion therapy, because I think that's unfair. I don't necessarily.
As I mentioned before, John, that is an umbrella term designed to evoke an emotional response. I think if you
What is an umbrella term, and what do you mean by that?
Well, I think it just has a label, and it has an emotion associated with it of giving people electrical shocks when they
the words
conversion therapy. Yeah.
Oh, okay, all right. I didn't know what you were talking about in terms of okay.
So I think conversion therapy it's a loaded term, because I think there's a difference between trying to change someone's sexual orientation and helping somebody say, how do we help you be comfortable in your body while you're going through puberty, which pretty much nobody likes,
Yeah, and the majority opinion was written by Neil Gorsuch, and he specifically called out the asymmetry as the Supreme Court saw it, and it said he wrote, "It means that the law discriminates based on the viewpoint being expressed. Under the court's First Amendment precedents, viewpoint-based regulation of speech gets the strictest form of constitutional review, meaning strict scrutiny." And basically what they did is they kicked it back to the lower courts and said, look, you better analyze this with really, really jaundiced eyes, right? Like, just, you can't, even though it buttresses up against what may be, dangerous therapy. And I'm not implying it is. I'm saying that, like, I don't know where the line is, and I'm curious from a psychiatric standpoint where you would draw it.
Well, let's take I think another case from the news. You want to talk about Kristi Noem's husband?
Yeah,
let's talk about that, and then we'll circle back.
Well, okay, explain to everybody, what is bimbofication? This is the name that has been bestowed upon, and tell everybody what's going on with Kristi Noem, who was the former, what was she? She was the Secretary of Homeland Security, right?
Yeah, actually, I haven't followed this closely, but I guess the husband,
he likes to dress up as a woman with large breasts, basically. And the term that they've denoted for this fetish, if you will, is bimbofication.
Okay. What
that is, I don't know, but go ahead, tell us what you're thinking.
So there is a subset, and there's some controversy in this field, but there's a subset of folks who believe there's a disorder called autogynephilia, where particularly men get aroused as seeing themselves as women, sometimes in the clothing of, sometimes having the body parts of women. It's called autogynephilia.
I mean, if you saw Silence of the Lambs, Buffalo Bill, right? I mean, he was trying to convert to be a woman and dressing and...
I actually never saw that movie, John, by the way.
We got to talk, Timmy.
So,
but
where this goes is, if you were in Colorado and you said, I'm bothered by the fact I dress up like a bimbo and take pictures of it, and I want to do something about it, as that law, Childs.
Yeah, Kaylee Childs.
As that law stands, the counselor could not help this man.
But does he need to be helped, is my question.
If it's causing him distress or dysfunction, it certainly, right?
Oh, okay. All right. It's a little bit more gray than I recognized. Okay.
So that's what I would say. So I would circle back and say, this is a perfect example of why you might want to have counselors who help people change or manage gender-related behaviors.
Fair enough.
Right?
Good point. Touche. Well received. Yeah. But again, why is it? Well, of course, I'm enjoying this myself but again, I don't think this is germane or relevant anymore. There used to be sort of divisions between the parties, that morality mattered. I mean, anybody who lived through the 1990s with Bill Clinton, and we can get into the power dynamics between he and Monica Lewinsky and so forth, but she was an adult. He, had sexual relations with her. They didn't consummate fully or whatever the splitting the atom was.
Right.
But the point being is the Republicans for years ran on this notion that morality in office matters. And I suppose I'm embracing further and further my brother's belief that there's really not terribly much difference between the two parties. And it was just to get votes. And if you need evidence of that, he said, look, we were bitching at Joe Biden 18 months ago about the price of gas. Have you noticed what the price of gas is these days? It's approaching $5 a gallon. Yeah. And he used that as an opportunity to say, hey, look, the same problems exist. Republicans come in, Democrats come in. They might have, subtle differences between the two, but they're all basically, he says, dirtbags. I'm unwilling to embrace that holistically. But his basic idea is, no, there's no such thing about caring about morality anymore, particularly as it relates to politics. Is that too draconian a statement, Tim, or do you agree with him?
I think there's a lot of truth to that at the party level, but I think parties are made up of individuals, some of whom really do care about this stuff.
Well, does this matter to you then as the Republican who, for 30, 40 years, basically all our life, we've heard from Bill Bennett and all these folks. I mean, the Catholic Church all but in does Kristi Noem's husband dressing up as a woman and engaging in this lewd behavior, they always went back to sort of their line of, what does this tell our children? I don't care. Have at it. Whatever he's into, I'm not there to judge. I think sex is an enormously complicated thing. People are turned on by feet. People are turned on by this, turned on by that. would this matter to you if this was, for instance, the spouse of the vice president?
Well, first of all,
as opposed to,
we elect and appoint people to do jobs, and for the most part, I think it's worth it to keep their family out of it. So this is in a lot of ways between her and him. And her performance on the job speaks enough for itself.
Yeah, she's already out of a job.
Yeah, so I don't find this particularly interesting or compelling, right?
It was something that jumped out at me, and it's sensational, so it's going to sell newspapers. I get it. But at the end of the day, I'm trying to be as consistent as possible. I don't care. He's the spouse of someone.
Do you recall there are pictures of Halloween parties where Rudy Giuliani does a quite good job of drag?
Of course.
Yeah.
But he was the mayor of New York City. I mean, New York City is the melting pot of every kook and cranny and so forth, right? I mean...
Yeah.
So it's just something that jumped out at me. I suppose the question I was really asking is, where's the Republican Party from 30 years ago where morality mattered? And again, maybe it's just because of Schadenfreude. What's that?
I think if this were the candidate, it would be a different story. But it's the candidate.
But why, okay, that leads to a larger question. Why? I don't care. I don't care either way.
Okay.
That the spouse of someone. Now I do care, and if you don't care, or you do care, does it matter to you that Clarence Thomas's wife was part of the January 6th investigation?
Right. Well, the other thing, though, I think it does, these sort of things, because there are stigmas associated with some of them, open you up to being compromised and blackmailed.
Fair.
And so I think at that level, there may be concern there, too.
Yeah. If we know about it, the Chinese certainly do, and so forth, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just, I get it. But to me, I'm a big, live and let live. I could care less. I was curious if morality still matters to the Republicans. It does to you. I get it. So,
Speaking of China, do you want an update?
I do.
The Gallup does this international trust score. Have you seen this?
No.
So they ask people from 130 countries, basically, what country's leadership do you trust? And in 2025, this is before Iran, China surpassed the U.S. in trustworthiness. China hangs out in the low to mid 30s. They're just kind of stable. Nobody really trusts them, but it hasn't budged much. And the U.S. dropped to 31%.
As of when?
This is based on a survey gathered in 2025.
I asked this not because, as you know, I'm not exactly a fan of the current occupant of the White House, but could it be as simple as people don't trust Donald Trump? I mean, I know politicians lie, and I understand crime is crime, but jaywalking and murder are not the same thing. And, George W. Bush, I'll use Republicans just to be consistent. George W. Bush's lies, Ronald Reagan's lies, George H.W. Bush's lies weren't as grand, as frequent, as over the top, as just outrageous as Donald Trump's. Could it be as simple as that?
There's a lot of that at play. So its peak was in the first Obama year, and it was low during the Iraq War and first Trump. So I think there's a lot of, but I think what's more telling to me is China has killed millions of its own people. It has concentration camps. Its tanks ran down its protesters, and I guess it's what you get with China. I guess is
right. But in the words of that erudite philosopher candidate Donald Trump, are we so much better? I don't agree with him, but he said that and became the president of the United States not once but twice.
Right.
Are we so innocent? That's what he said in an interview when they were talking about human rights violations.
Yeah.
So I think that ship has sailed. Am I wrong, Timmy?
Well, I just thought it was because I think that what people appreciate with China is just it's stable. It may be ruthless and have its boot on the neck of its own citizens, but you can predict it. And I think
it is consistently a dick.
Yeah, I think that's what we can say. And the U.S. fluctuates.
Yeah, we try. That's a terrible way of looking at it, but it's kind of like NCAA basketball. Like you said about NIL, you have to accept the premise that big-time college athletics is just a cesspool of behavior and dirty money. And once you operate backwards from that, it's a whole lot easier to deal with.
Yeah.
So I got it.
So to that end, just some update. China is building another artificial island near Vietnam, so it could put airstrips and missile launchers. The FBI has accused a Chinese national and 2 Americans of trying to smuggle out AI technology. So meanwhile, our trust score is low. China is continuing to be untrustworthy.
Well, the final thing I want to revisit, because I think this is a new Pandora's box that has been opened, and I would argue probably should have been opened sooner, which deals with the implications of the verdict that was just adjudicated and awarded to a California woman claiming that YouTube and Meta were responsible for addictive behavior, led to suicidal ideation and, negative body image, body dysphoria, and so forth. And George Will, who I love and I respect, even if I don't necessarily agree, and you don't, I thought that his article about this was very well written. And let me just read a couple of call outs from it. Is that okay, Tim?
Sure.
Okay. So George Will writes, and it's byline April 3rd, 2026. It says, the verdict against Meta and Google carries sinister implications. And then the subtitle says, diluting democracy's foundational belief in individual agency opens the door to governmental overreach. Basically saying that this verdict could be opening a bad door. But again, I think he minimizes the implications, and I really want to hear your thoughts on this, right? So it says the California jury weighed the claims of a now 20-year-old woman who began using YouTube at age 6 and Instagram when she was 9. She says her many emotional and social problems were caused not by her troubled family life, but by these platforms. The jury agreed with her claims. It said confusingly that Meta and Google were both negligent and deliberate in designing algorithms and other devices to make the platform's content addictive. And then he goes on to talk about how reporting basically agrees with it and so forth. I think that the reason I want to talk about this is this might be a be careful what you wish for moment. And I wanted to hear your thoughts on this, Tim. Is George Will minimizing the addictive content, which I'm sure you see in your office daily, of social media, of constant stimulation and so forth? Please hold court.
So I think his premise is built on a pre-1950s era. He puts the individual against the company with government as a, potentially biased referee. What he neglects to say is the other agent is the persistent, relentless technology that is waiting for you, will wake you from your sleep, will know when you're starting to look at something else, will design things just for you. And it doesn't slumber. And that changes the equation. So yeah, two guys in a street, the government doesn't need to intervene in their market interactions. But that is not what's happening here, and especially not what's happening with children.
Do you think it from your medical perspective, from your expertise, has it been proven that these things are addictive? I mean, there's testimony to the fact that most of the Facebook programmers, engineers, YouTube, it's almost like one of these things like, yeah, of course. I liken it to the O.J. Simpson verdict. They didn't prove it per se, but everybody knows O.J. Simpson was guilty, right? Has this been proven? Can we operate backwards from this premise that the social media sort of algorithms are addictive? Or is that still in the offing? So
proven is a funny, proven to what standard, I think is a good question. But we know they're designed to increase engagement and reinforcement over time. And just look at what has happened to people. If it was neutral, would people be spending so much time on this and having so much trouble with it? I just read a book, Broken Code, and the Facebook people they would do A/B tests, and the test that won is the test that kept people on the platform more. So they know what they're doing.
Is it as addictive, or from your perspective? I'm not asking you to give a medical answer to this. I'm just asking from your perspective. Is it as addictive as, say, tobacco, as alcohol, and so forth?
See, I don't think you could necessarily make the comparison, because the hard part is, in modern society, most people, for convenience or just actual practicality, need to be online, right? You've got your dealer in your pocket, right? You can change your phone number, move apartments, and you're not going to run into your dealer. But in this case, those options are much harder.
Yeah, that's the thing that I will go back to whenever I talk to you about this, with particularly as it relates to gambling, because I tend to be a libertarian as it relates to individual agency and choice. But until it impacts someone other than you, I am a big believer that things should be legalized. And by that, I think all drugs should be legalized. I think gambling should be further legalized, which clearly so does Congress, and, prostitution, things of that nature. But again, you have always pointed out, and I really respect this, that, back in the 60s, 70s, even 80s, 90s, you wanted to place a bet on the Super Bowl, you had a guy in a back alley and you gave him $100 and blah, blah, blah. And now you literally it's at the push of a button. They've made it so much easier to be a degenerate, right?
So I'd be happy with legalized gambling if it all had to be recorded on paper and done face to face.
Okay.
Sports
that's kind of how I feel.
Yeah.
I mean, isn't that the same thing with everything that you and I talk about, which, social media, one of the things that we don't know how many of these things are algorithms, number one. Number two, nobody has to put their name to things, so they can just say, hey, you're fat, or you're this, or you're that, or they can write to a journalist and not put their name to anything because it's anonymous. I mean, the Sixth Amendment is basically based on this idea that you have a right to face your accusers, right?
Yeah.
The basic premise behind that. And the idea is you're going to be much more sort of reserved, reticent, that kind of thing. You're not going to engage in this kind of crazy behavior if you have to look somebody in the face.
And Meta had internal data that 1 out of 3 girls felt worse about their body and themselves after being on the platform and didn't do anything about it. It's just crazy.
Now, I'm going to read you this final quote, and then we'll get into our hero and our whack job of the week. I want to hear your thoughts on this. You ready, Tim?
Yep.
About 2/3 through the article, Will writes, many beneficial technologies and popular social developments are misused by small portions of their users. People drive aggressively, consume alcohol excessively, and gamble recklessly. Fast food chains profit from heavy, in several senses, users. Some people derive from such behaviors pleasure so powerful that their brain chemistry causes in them supposedly irresistible cravings for dangerous repetitions. However, medicalizing this by terming it addiction gives it a scientific patina to what is a contestable political philosophical stance of helplessness. That's a big one, Tim. What do you think? Medicalizing it by calling it addiction is at best questionable.
Well, I would say that calling something an addiction does not correlate with helplessness. I'm a member of the American Society of Addiction Medicine.
That's why I asked.
Yeah. Calling something by its name gives you a chance to do something about it.
Meaning if you have a drinking problem and you say I'm an alcoholic, it breaks
start.
Sort of that back. Yeah, it breaks the
yeah,
back
that's a
of
start.
It, right?
And I think acknowledging that these systems really are manipulated to manipulate you. And I don't know if addiction is the perfect word, but I think it's a useful word when we think about this, for sure. Especially in young brains who grow up not knowing anything different.
Yeah, I think the best way I will say this is I love George Will. I think that what his point is well received, which is just because certain things happen doesn't mean that you can't accept responsibility for your bad behavior, right? But I think he misses sort of the forest for the trees of how these things have been programmed, how readily available and such. So I tend to be more on your side on this than otherwise. But I do think that this might be be careful what you wish for. But I am happy to see that these social media apps and such are having their day in the sun, so to speak.
I think so. And I also think these companies are sort of collectively acting on us. And there are ways that people can act collectively too. One of them is with the government. The other one is with combined individual action. And so I would like to see action to challenge what has been, the space that has been taken over by these companies.
Yeah, now that this finding is in the public record, we're going to really see what these guys knew they were doing. And by these guys, I mean the Facebooks, the YouTubes, the Metas, and so forth, and how they program, to your point, recognizing they really want to hook you, so to speak, for lack of a better term. So, well, Timmy, I have a whack job this week.
I have a whack job. We'll double whack job.
Okay, cool. My whack job is very simple and straightforward. It's President Trump. And the reason being is I understand that Iran shouldn't be getting a nuclear weapon. There are questions as to why it's okay that we have nuclear weapons, Israel has nuclear weapons, Pakistan and others, blah, blah, blah. But again, we can leave that to the side. What I can tell you is he hasn't justified in any way, shape, or form why we are suddenly bombing Iran. And now we're seeing it at the gas pump, and people are shocked by this. Gas today in my local gas pump, and this is why I'm making my whack job, is $4.19. I guarantee by July, it's going to be $5 or $6 a gallon. It's not going back down. And he has issued a new threat today to Iran that says if they don't open the Strait of Hormuz, he's going to bomb bridges, power plants, and so forth. I don't understand why. We are the only country in the world that actively seeks to bomb people. I tend to be libertarian both in my political philosophy and in my international relations. Until it affects us directly, I don't know why we got involved. I can't figure it out. I don't think he understands. I think he thought it'd be fun to drop some bombs and distract from the Epstein files, and that's why he's my whack job this week.
I hear ya. So my whack job, John, surprisingly enough, comes from the University of Wisconsin.
Hold on, let me sit down. Where does it come from?
The University of Wisconsin system,
No,
I should say.
Timmy.
Yeah. Believe it or not?
I do. Go
So,
ahead,
John,
Timmy.
this is I have to explain some backstory, but what you're going to hear about is a perfect passive-aggressive Midwestern standoff. You ready for this?
Uh-huh.
So the Board of Regents, who oversees all the state universities of Wisconsin, is appointed by, the regents are appointed by the governor. They have told the president of the Wisconsin system, Jay Rothman, they want him to resign. He says, I don't want to resign. I think it's a bad time. You're replacing the chancellor of the University of Wisconsin-Madison now, and please tell me why you want me to resign. And they said, well, we all have some concerns. And so he is not resigning. And they said, if you don't resign, we'll fire you. But they're not firing him. So it's this is a passive-aggressive standoff. Quit or we'll fire you, but they're not firing him.
It's good work if you can get it, right?
Yeah. Meanwhile, he's collected like $600,000 a year. So my whack job is the whole board, and especially the board president, Amy Bogust. I will tell you, when I wrote to each one of the regents about 2 years ago with concern of mismanagement and waste at the University of Wisconsin, and got crickets. So there's a little personalness in this whack job too.
Timmy, I can't get over this, that your University of Wisconsin-Madison is your whack job. Is producing your whack job.
But this is
fascinating to me.
This is the silliest thing. It's a passive-aggressive standoff. It's like, well, you quit or we'll fire you, and they haven't fired him. And I think it's because if he gets... So his employment contract says they can fire him at will. But I think if he claimed something was wrong, I think he could unearth things in discovery that they don't want found.
Oh, I guarantee it.
Yeah.
I guarantee that's what it is.
I think that's what they're doing. So
you've got to go through 97 different hoops before you can actually fire somebody.
Yeah. So
yeah, I get it. So, well, Timmy, it was great to reconnect finally, and happy Easter to everyone out there. I hope everybody had a wonderful holiday, and I'll just leave off by saying, go Yukon. And hey, this is John Boland saying, misbehave, drive fast, take chances.
And this is Tim saying, if everybody likes what you're doing, you're probably not doing anything worthwhile. Take care out there.